Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Daniel Rosehill podcast. This podcast is automatically syndicated to my YouTube channel called Daniel Rosehill. If you're listening on YouTube, please feel free to play this audio on background. This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcatching apps. Thanks for listening, and here's today's episode. Hello friends and subscribers, welcome back to another edition of the Daniel Rosehill podcast. You might also be catching this on YouTube and saying, what's going on? I subscribed for YouTube videos and now I'm getting these podcasts. The answer is that YouTube introduced this awesome podcasting feature back in 2022 and I was asleep at the wheel. Well, I didn't really actually have a podcast. I mean, I did. I've had a podcast for years that I've just kind of left to wither on the internet, but I stumbled upon this feature and I thought it just meant that you can upload video podcasts to YouTube, and what it actually means, well, you can do that as well, but the more powerful feature is that you can say, hey, I have a podcast and I have a YouTube channel, and why don't I put my podcast on my YouTube channel? So you can do that pretty easily. If you have a podcast, you probably know what an RSS feed is. And every time you upload a podcast and that updates the RSS feed, you can connect your RSS feed to your YouTube podcast and YouTube will automatically say, hey, there is audio, there is episode art. We have all the elements needed to make this into a video. And it does make it into a video. And I think that's pretty cool. So this video cropped up on YouTube without me pushing any buttons. I just uploaded a podcast and YouTube did the rest. So I'm quite excited about this, not actually so much for this YouTube channel, but for another one that I recently set up called Readings in Impact Investing. It's a professional initiative. I read reports in the field of impact investing, and I was manually uploading those episodes to YouTube, and it was such an annoying process that I knew I wasn't going to keep it up. And now I can forget about that process and just focus on uploading the podcast, and YouTube will do the rest. But I will drop in now and again with podcasts on this YouTube channel. So if you're more accustomed to receiving videos, I'm still going to be producing videos. I will be primarily producing videos on this YouTube channel, but I have set up the podcast integration. So now and again, I'll say, I look too pathetic. I'm currently actually wearing a sloth onesie. Yes, you heard that correctly. My wife recently bought me a sloth onesie to keep warm in the office. So for those who don't know, I'm kind of obsessed with sloths. Visiting Costa Rica is one of my major life aspirations, to see sloths in real life. It's not really a sloth onesie. It's like one of those things that keeps you warm that just happens to be decorated as a sloth, though it's also going to duplicate as a Purim costume. So I'm pretty excited about that. I won't lie, it's pretty awesome. But I don't really feel like getting in front of a webcam and showing the world just how crazy I am. So I have the luxury of being in a onesie while you can't see me. Haha. All right, guys. Today I'm going to talk about a article that came up in the Jewish News Syndicate, the JNS. Arab shop owners in Eastern Jerusalem strike over al-Arouri killing. And I'm going to call this episode, let's see, I have it in my notes. If I click on here we go. Does East Jerusalem support Hamas? Because I think that's the kernel that we have to get to the heart of here. So what happened was that, a few days ago, Israel basically assassinated the deputy chief of Hamas, who was hiding out in Beirut. But that's not really, according to Israel, what happened. They deny that. Israel has a long-standing policy of they neither deny nor confirm, which I've started saying. I've started using that in colloquial speech because I think it's kind of funny. Like, people will be like, were you at the bar last night? Did you go out drinking? I say, I can neither confirm nor deny these rumors. But this has been Israel's long-standing policy, that they neither confirm nor deny when they are alleged to have done something. So, but basically the dogs on the street know that Israel killed this guy Saleh al-Arouri in a drone strike in Beirut, and this occurred on January the 2nd. So just after the New Year, this guy was taken out by a drone strike. And that actually, interestingly enough, the simple fact that Israel used drones for military purposes was actually another open state secret until a few years ago, when Israel's military censor finally said, all right, okay, everybody knows this. We're going to just allow you, Israeli military media, to report that you can say that, an IDF drone did this and did that. Something interesting that I really should do a proper video about is that Israel has something called a military censor. My first job in Israel was actually as a copy editor at the Jerusalem Post, which is why their use of Eastern Jerusalem tickles my memory. And one of my jobs was to send some stuff to the military censor. Very sketchy. The military censor basically just makes sure that journalists don't inadvertently reveal stuff that might help the enemy. And it exists, and it's it's controversial because people, of course, can easily say, "Hey, you're trying to suppress information." But the interesting thing to note is that, as far as I know, it's mostly, well, it is really Israeli media subject to it. So sometimes the international media have more leeway to report on things than domestic Israeli outlets. So let me read this article from the JNS. In a show of solidarity with Hamas, Arab-Israeli shop owners in eastern Jerusalem shuttered their stores in a one-day strike on January 3rd to protest Israel's targeted killing of top terror chief Saleh al-Arouri in Beirut a day earlier. An absolute majority of shops, not only in the Old City but in all of eastern Jerusalem, went on strike, Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Aryeh King told the JNS. So I just want to interject that Aryeh King is a far right-wing activist. I'm not trying to discredit him, but I'm just trying to point out that the bias here. Aryeh King, I've done a few videos about him. He is running for office in Jerusalem on a very, very far-right platform. He's the guy who advocates for Jews to move into East Jerusalem. He once advocated for a scheme whereby Palestinians would be paid to leave the city. So he's an extremely controversial figure in not just Jerusalem but international politics. So I wouldn't necessarily say that he is making this up, but I would say that he has an agenda, and that should be just noted for the purposes of being thorough here. Al-Arouri, the commander of Hamas operations in Judea and Samaria and deputy Politburo chief under Hamas chairman Ismail Haniyeh, had been based in Lebanon. He was one of the top Hamas leaders on Israel's target list following the terror group's October 7th massacre. Just as, and this is King again, just as there is a very large support for Hamas in Gaza, there is also a very large support for Hamas in Jerusalem. And this was reflected in the strike that took place after al-Arouri was eliminated. The problem has been continued to fester, he said. The Israeli police need to deal with eastern Jerusalem the same way they deal with Judea and Samaria. Go house to house and clean them of weapons. Arrest anyone who incites to terror and anyone who supports Hamas. Terrorists should be stripped of national insurance payments and all other benefits and then deported from the country, he said. There is an enforcement problem in the largely Arab eastern parts of Jerusalem, King said. If you own a restaurant in the western part of the city and place tables and chairs outside your business, the municipality will come and enforce the law. You'll get a fine. Do that in eastern Jerusalem and no one says a word. King added that there are known drug stations in eastern Jerusalem and nothing happens to them, and the same for illegal building. So anyway, all that stuff about Aryeh King aside, and you can kind of predict that he's going to use this to say that we should deport them. But I don't doubt that these stores were closed. There was a solidarity strike with Hamas because, firstly, the JNS is it's not actually such a. I'm a little bit surprised to see them referring to East Jerusalem as Eastern Jerusalem. Coming back again to my time as a copy editor at the Jerusalem Post. It was a very short tenure, but I did work there for a few months. And that was something in our style guide that we couldn't say East Jerusalem because that would offend the sensibilities of right-wing Israelis who balk at the term Eastern Jerusalem, much as they balk at the term Judea and Samaria. They balk at West Bank instead of Judea and Samaria. I think these semantics are kind of ridiculous, but evidently a lot of people disagree with me. So anyway, but the JNS is quite reputable, and I also saw this reported in a couple of other places. So there was a strike, and you can only conclude from the strike, if you're striking at the elimination of a Hamas terrorist, that you sympathize with Hamas. So this does seem like quite a strong indication that there is widespread support for Hamas in East Jerusalem. There's also this quite interesting, shocking, I would say, polling data that was conducted in the wake of October 7th. Now, the issue with East Jerusalem is that most of them are permanent residents, and also Israel is very strict about not allowing the Palestinian Authority to operate in East Jerusalem because they see that as they see that the PA wants to operate there, and they want to and they want to, put down the roots of governance in East Jerusalem. What's the idea to governing the east of the city? So Israel is very, very strict at thwarting any activity, and therefore this polling, which was conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy Survey and Research, one of the PCPSR, one of the consequences of Israel's decision to basically stand on the neck of the PA in East Jerusalem is that they can't do this kind of polling there. So anyway, that being aside, this is from Reuters, and this was on December 14th. And I'm going to read this article as well. Poll shows Palestinians back October 7th attack on Israel, support for Hamas rises. Jerusalem, December 13th. Almost 3 in 4 Palestinians believe that the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel was correct, and the ensuing Gaza war has lifted support for the Islamist group both there and in the West Bank, a survey from a respected Palestinian polling institution has found. The Palestinian Center for Policy Survey and Research, PCPSR, published findings as international alarm grows over the spiralling Palestinian civilian toll. 72% of respondents said they believed the Hamas decision to launch the cross-border rampage in southern Israel was correct, given its outcome so far, while only 22%, and I'm interjecting the word only, while only 22% said that it was incorrect. The remainder gave undecided or no answers. Let's do the numbers. 72 plus 22 is 84, so 16% were undecided. So basically, I would say it's reasonable to assume that if 70, this is shocking. This is shocking. This was published on December 13th after basically all the atrocities of October 7th had been laid bare, right? By this point, by early December, we knew that entire families had been literally burned alive. We had photos of scorched remains of civilians. We knew about the rape. We knew about the brutal murder. All this was known. And yes, where's that figure? 72% of Palestinians believed that was right for Hamas to do. So I think this is absolutely shocking. And I think this really brings to light this great myth in the West that it's only a minority. There's bad apples in Palestinian society, but the majority are peaceful. Well, that's not what this is showing. What we're seeing here is that more than 7 out of 10 Palestinians believe that grisly mass terrorism and butchering civilians and burning them alive is something that is justified and the right thing to do. So I think if you look at the absolute, at just that startling number, and you remember that East Jerusalem Palestinians identify themselves as first and foremost Palestinians by and large. I'm not saying there aren't some who go through this process of Israelification, if you want, but the vast majority identify as Palestinians. And among that cohort, 7 out of 10, more than 7 out of 10, support Hamas. So I think when you look at that, I could point to as well the fact that there are Hamas flags commonly feature on the Temple Mount, in the Shuafat refugee camp, which is in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. There have been Hamas marches before. And now Israel also, just as it kind of tries to avoid the PA getting any foothold in East Jerusalem, they also are pretty diligent about seizing Hamas flags and, banning Hamas gatherings. So those are usually dispersed, but nevertheless they happen. So I think taking all these facts together, I do think it's reasonable to conclude that there is significant support for Hamas in East Jerusalem. The fact that there is support doesn't mean that Hamas operates in East Jerusalem, although that also happens. There have been a large number of so-called lone wolf stabbings in East Jerusalem, and the perpetrators are often found to have been allied with the Hamas organization. So to some extent, Hamas operates. The only difference between East Jerusalem and the West Bank is the fact that there is a wall separating the two, and that gives Israel some kind of security control over East Jerusalem. It's a little bit easier for Israel to operate and to control East Jerusalem when it's protected by that wall, and when it doesn't have to worry about the Palestinian Authority having autonomy as it does in the West Bank. When it goes into Area A, that needs to be coordinated on paper at least with the PA. But what's happening in East Jerusalem, I think it's safe to say that if there wasn't that wall, there is huge support for Hamas there. They went on strike in support of Hamas, in solidarity with Hamas. And again, I just remind people of that statistic. And I'm not saying this to make a political. Although I guess I am really. There is this peaceful majority myth is a myth, and there's a lot of different surveys that can be taken out to point this out. But just look at that number again. I'm just going to read it one more time, then we'll end. 72% of Palestinians believe that Hamas's October 7th massacre was correct. And 22, 1 in 5 saying that was not correct, just over 1 in 5, and the rest were undecided. But that means that more than 7 out of 10 said, yes, that was a good thing to do. We are happy that Hamas went on a killing spree, murdering over 1,000 people, beheading children, raping women. That's all the kind of stuff we think is good. So anyway, that is the end of this podcast episode. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a comment on this YouTube video. I don't think you can comment on podcasts really, so maybe there's more interaction here. And do feel free to get in touch by email, which is on the About page of YouTube, if you've got further thoughts that you'd like to get across privately. Thanks for listening. Have a good day, and until the next episode.